one day you are going to be in an interview. Hopefully you go out there and you can be in a job interview, and you need to be prepared for one question, because most job interviews will ask you this question, especially for career ones. It's, where do you see yourself in 10 years or 5 years or however along the way? Where do you see yourself in 10 years from now? Now, why do they ask that question particularly? Because depending on how you answer that question actually tells them a lot about who you are. It tells them what's important to you. It tells them what your goal is. It tells you how ambitious you are, because if you're like, hey, I want to own my own company, they're like, wow, this guy seems like a go-getter, or this gal seems like a go-getter. And then if you're like, I'm just, as long as I got enough money to not starve and play video games, I'll be good. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's one approach, but this guy may have a little bit of distractions or low bar setting for the entirety of their life. It tells them how much you would like to make. It tells them your experience in some ways. It's a great question to look at yourself in the future and what is your goal, what is your desire. I love time travel movies. It's a passion of mine. I love Back to the Future. I've always wanted a DeLorean just to see what happens truly at 88 miles per hour. Who has seen Back to the Future? Okay, thank you. It was that or an Interstellar reference, and I'm picked right. Though it's great to see these movies, where we talk about traveling in the future, maybe seeing yourself one day ahead, but sometimes we don't like that. We like seeing it for other people and how they respond to it, but we don't like the idea of maybe seeing into our own future. We like to imagine what a dream scenario is. But if we had a time machine up on this stage and we could hit a button and out walked you from the future, we'll say 30 years from now, what would you want to see? What would you desire to see in yourself 30 years from now? If you were able to sit down with yourself and have coffee, what achievements would you like to hear? What type of finances, what type of family would you want to see? How would your weaknesses that you face now, do you hope that aren't there 30 years from now? What would success in that person from the future be to you? And for some of us, and honestly, even me, there is a little bit of a fear or dread or maybe an undesire to see that. Because what if my future self isn't who I would like to turn out to be? What if they don't live the way I wanted them to end up living? Now, I want you to know you don't have to be fearful about this, because Paul, I believe in this passage, lays out the steps of what it looks like to live a great life, because that's what it's all about. Why do we ask the question, where do you want to see yourself? Well, you don't want to see yourself in a bad life. You want to see yourself in a great life. But Paul shows us a step-by-step layout of how to have a great life. But it only works on one condition. It works on the condition that you desire to live a life consumed with Christ and nothing else. Now, that doesn't mean you don't like other things. That doesn't mean you pursue things like graduation. You need to get there eventually. Work, marriage, all these different things, they're great. Do them. But do them by Christ, through Christ, and for Christ. This life is worth living, not just because we say so, but because we can be satisfied in seeing Christ magnified. The title of tonight's sermon is the ABCs of a great life. We're going to be in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, but our key thought for us is this: with a great life is guaranteed when we have a great approach, belonging, and certainty that is rooted in Christ and his kingdom. A great life is guaranteed when we have a great approach, belonging, and certainty that is rooted in Christ and his kingdom. So we're going to start this out with talking about a great approach. A great approach. So we're going to read Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. Pause what you're doing. We got one word in, we already got to stop. He says, now whenever you're reading scripture and there's a few words that if you identify them, you need to pause what you're doing and go back and read what was right before that. Those words are for, obviously, because we've stopped. Because, therefore, convinced of this, since, for this reason, knowing this. If you hear any of these phrases when you're reading, you need to pause what you're doing and go right back to what was right beforehand. So we're going to go back and read the verse that happened that we talked about last week, but to recap it now again. So why is Paul saying for in verse 21? Well, because in verse 20 he says, according to my earnest expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or death. So Paul is saying, despite my imprisonment, despite the fact that I'm writing this from a cell, I have hope. But not just hope. I have expectation. It's not like oh, I really hope this works out. No, there is an expectation, an earnest expectation that Christ is going to be magnified despite this difficult situation, no matter what happens. And that may be weird to us, because sometimes we think the worst thing that can happen to us is we die. And that might be the logical scenario of a worst case scenario. But he's saying, no, that's not the worst case in this life, is death. And so because we read verse 20, now we can go into verse 21 more properly. And he says in verse 21, why is he okay with this life or death situation? Because in verse 21 it says, for to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me. And I do not know which to choose, but I am hard pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that your proud confidence in me may abound in Christ Jesus through my coming to you again. Now, if we want to have a great life, we must have a great approach to this life. Approach is not just tactics. Let's get that straight. It's not just tactics. See, if I look at Alan in the back, Alan is back there running the tech. Everyone give it up for Alan for running tech for y'all. Let me tell you, Matt's cool. Matt is a very cool worship leader, but he cannot make those slides change just by the power of his voice. There's got to be someone who's making it all happen, and Alan and Larry are very faithful every week in making sure all the things that y'all don't see get done. And so if Alan's back there and I'm going to walk to Alan, I'm going to approach him. Well, what's got to happen for that to happen? Well, I got to move my legs and my arms, hopefully, so I don't look weird when I walk. But I've got to physically move my body back to him. Now, here's the thing. Is that the only thing I got to do? No. There's got to be some vision with that. Because if I cover my eyes or close my eyes and try to approach him, can I still physically complete that task? Yeah, I'm probably going to fall off the stage almost immediately. I'm probably going to hit every chair walking back there. I'm probably going to turn a little too early or a little too late. And it's just going to be a laughing show for y'all to see me try to approach him with just tactics. What we also need is vision. Vision and perspective is just as important as tactics. And when we talk about approaching this life to live. So to live a great life, tactics are just a part of it. We must see that Paul here, his approach is his perspective of, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. What does that mean? What it means to him is it no matter what, is a win-win. It's a win-win. There's two options here. I can live, and if I do, I live for Christ. And if I die, so be it, then I also die for Christ. You see, these truths are not disconnected. You can't have one without the other. But sometimes when we, as Christians, apply this in our life, I've talked about before that the Christians walk around with a lot of lost hope today because they think that their hope is only in the future. Oh, well, I guess they sound like Eeyore. Well, I guess everything's gonna be okay, even if my life doesn't turn out, because at least I'll get to go to heaven. But that's not our hope. Our hope is now. Because we do have a future hope, that is to come, we also have one now that is rooted in living for Christ. But to flip that, we cannot have that future hope if we do not currently live for him as well. Charles Spurgeon has a analogy that I love on this verse. Charles Spurgeon told a story. There was a businessman one day in a court square, and a businessman was standing there, and he said, well, for me to live is security and comfort, because I can make money, I can provide for my family, everything's gonna be okay because I have comfort and security. And there was a college student hearing this man boast. And the college student, well, for me to live is learning, is what he said. Because when I learn, I gain wisdom, and I know what the men of the world and what the scribes and all the teachers have to offer in this life. So for me to live is learning. And then a soldier was standing by, and a soldier with armor and a helmet and a massive spear scoffed at both of them and said, well, for me to live is glory and honor, because I can fight a battle worth fighting in that glory and honor. And as these men were debating whose life was worth the more living, a young tent maker named Paul walked up and said, for me to live is Christ. They all laughed at him. And the businessman said, well, if you to live as Christ, then you will have no comfort and no security. What life is that? And the student said, well, if you live as Christ, how will you gain the wisdom that this world has to offer? And the soldier said, if you live for Christ, how will you ever fight a battle or even die a death worth dying? And Paul proudly sticks out his chest and says, because I live for Christ, I have all the security and comfort I need. And because I live for Christ, the wisdom that is only worth having is from above, which I can have. And because I live for Christ, I serve in a battle with glory and honor that is from God, and that battle has already been won. So my question today is, what is you to live for? What is your desire, like we talked about last week? What's the most valuable thing in your life? These questions will lead to what you live for. What would upset you more? If your college today sent you a letter in the mail and said you are being kicked out of your college, you're losing all your college credits, you will not get a diploma, and you will not be able to transfer these credits of these classes you've taken. Well, let me tell you, I'm in college right now, and if I got that email, I'm calling registrar office and someone's fighting. Like, it's gonna happen. But I'm just kidding. I wouldn't find anyone in the registrar office. But would it upset you more to lose that? Or would it upset you more to lose a mere moment with your God? When you say for you to live as Christ, and I pray that you all do, and I pray that you all honestly say that and mean that and pursue that, but what consumes you? What consumes your mind? What does your, none of you probably carry checkbooks, but your bank statements say? What does your schedule reflect? I don't have many places to pull analogies because I've only done 2 things in my life, and that was wrestle and military. But when I wrestled, it was my everything. For me to live was wrestling. And it affected my diet. It affected, because I had to cut weight or gain weight or whatever the season asked of me. My schedule was changed, my sleeping was changed, my training was changed, everything was changed. Now, I'm not saying school, sports, relationships, friends, all those other things you have in life are not good and not important. They are. They are indeed things that you can and should pursue and do them rightly. But when I wrestled in my high school years, I did have an idol of this sport. And for me to live was wrestling. Even the things that had nothing to do with wrestling was affected by it. See, when I would go to class, I was in class, and because I was wrestling, my mind was focused on that. It wasn't just I need to make good grades just cause. It was I need to make good grades so I can not get kicked off the team. When I would go on a date with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, I would say, hey, Faith, let's go out on a date. And then we would go out, and because I was cutting weight, I'd sit there and watch her eat food. And she hated it more than I did. And so, my life was wrestling. And because of that, everything else in it was affected by it. In the same way, all those things that you're facing in life, school, buddies, friends, jobs, all those are good. But if you can say for you to live as Christ, how does your approach and your perspective of your relationship with him affect all those other things? Because it will. See, if I stood here today and tried to tell you that you need to change your ways, not change your perspective, not change your approach, just change your ways, be better, prioritize Jesus more, blah, 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 then you're going to have a terrible life of legalism, of disappointment, because you'll never live up to the standard that you were created to live to. But if we examine how we approach this life and view it with a proper perspective, then everything we do as a result will just be a product of that perspective. We can only say to die is gain if our life is truly for Christ. We can only have joy in suffering if it is a joy to live for Christ, and he is our desire. You see, when he says, for me to die is gain, he's saying there's a tough decision here. He says in these verses, but if I live on in the flesh, then that will mean fruitful labor for me. I do not know which to choose. And he's explaining this wrestling. I can go to heaven and be with God, or I can continue on and serve him with you. Matthew Henry has a great quote on this. Matthew Henry's nicknamed the world's greatest commentator. He said, the apostles' difficulty was not between living in the world and living in heaven. Between these two, there is no comparison. But between serving Christ in this world and enjoying him in another, there is no choosing between the two things, as one has an advantage more than the other. But the decision is between two good things, two things that bring us closer to God. The greatest hope of a Christian, hey, being in God's presence in heaven is the greatest thing. Absolutely, 100%. It's the greatest hope of the Christian to see the unveiled glory of God, but that does not devalue what we are here for. In fact, those with hope and desire to depart and see their God should be the ones most willing to stay as long as they can so God can use them. To see the mercies he has in their life before seeing eternal mercy in the next. So his approach is to say, I'm staying here. Because when he's focusing and making his life on Jesus, it also points to outwards. Because why is he staying? Just to chill? Just to play a few games or hang out with others? No, it's to serve others. He says in this next verse 25, convinced of this. Convinced of this. See, sometimes when I think about convinced, I think about just debating like ESPN or whatever. It's like, convince me why you think LeBron James is better than Michael Jordan. He's not. But they're like, you need to convince me. Give me some statistics. Give me some arguments of why, and change my mind intellectually. But this convincing that Paul is talking about is not referring to, hey, you need to intellectually prove I'm right or you're right. It is a matter of conviction. He's saying, I have conviction because I know to live as Christ, to die as gain. I know it's better to continue on for your progress. So I want to stay for your joy and your confidence so that you can be closer to God. And he's saying here, by serving others, I am serving God as well. See, if you live for Christ, you will live for others, both in tactics, but also just simply in perspective. Do you view others in this light? Do you live as if they are worth staying for you? Which leads me to my next point, that not only do we have a great approach, but we have a great belonging. A great belonging. It says in verse 27, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. So whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, in no way alarmed by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction for them, but salvation for you. So what does verse 27 mean, especially that first little part? Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that you have to be worthy enough to receive the gospel. You do not come and get yourself clean to receive grace. You receive grace and then you are made clean. What he is saying here is what you believe is how you will live. The word believe actually means, broken down in the English, by living, by life. Behavior matches belief. Practice matches profession. The word conduct here in Greek is tied with a political connotation in a manner worthy of. He is saying here in a political way that when you say, or when he says, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, he is saying, live as a citizen of the gospel in heaven would. That is what he is saying. Live as a citizen of a kingdom that you're a part of. Everyone right now, if you have your wallet, if you don't run out to your car, it's fine. But if you got your wallet, pull your driver's license out right now. I'll give you a second. Pull your driver's license out. Take a look at it. Right on. So, in the matter of font size, what is the biggest word on the front of your driver's license? Alabama. That's what I love to hear. Some of y'all, anyone without an Alabama one? Oh, right on. A few. If y'all, I see some of y'all like putting your thumbs over the picture so no one can see your driver's license photo. Well, we've all been there. It's terrible. But Alabama. It's the biggest words on your driver's license. It's your license. Don't you think your name would be the biggest thing on that license? So if you go to another state and you're pulled over by a cop and he says, hey, can I see your identification? The first thing he's gonna see when he looks at your identification is where you are from, where you are a citizen, what is your home? Because that's one of the most important things about you. And when they read that, they know because of where you're from, who you are, where you're going, that's knowing kind of who you are as well. When we approach our life to living for Christ, then the reason we can say to die is gain is because we have a citizenship that is in heaven. Nowhere else, it's in heaven. It's not just something about us. It's not just like your height or your weight. It is something that is the main thing about us. It is part of who we are. When I went to boot camp, there was a young man there, and he was from the country of Cameroon, and he in Africa. And a lot of guys who want citizenship, who can serve in the military, will join to just gain citizenship, and that's great. I think that's a great way to obtain that. But I never forget, on the first day of boot camp, we were swearing these guys into U.S. citizenship so that they could serve in our military. And it was kind of a sweet moment. We all got to stand around and see 3 or 4 guys become U.S. citizens. It was cool. And I will never forget this one guy from Cameroon. They were saying, you will no longer be you will no longer be a citizen of the Cameroonian government. You are now a citizen of the United States. Now, he thought that he was going to maintain dual citizenship. He thought he was going to get to keep both of his citizenships. And it's like, that's not how that works, bud. Not when you serve in the military, or at least how it was when I was in. And they said, no, you are no longer going to be a citizen. You will be a citizen of the United States. And he goes, but I love Cameroon. Like, it was just like so innocent. It was kind of sad. It was like, oh man, like he didn't want to leave his citizenship, but he knew this was something he had to do because where he's from, there was no prospering. There was no freedom. There was drug lords, corrupt governments. And so he was giving that away for something more. But that interaction didn't end there. It was actually funny. After that little sincere moment, for the rest of boot camp, he would come up to us and he would say, hey, what do Americans like to eat? Well, we usually eat everyone else's food. What do Americans listen to? Like what music? Or what American sports do y'all like? And what American cars do you drive? And like this switch changed in him. It went from, becoming an American, I thought I could do both. I thought I could be a citizen in Cameroon, but also a citizen in America. And when it was like, it's one or the other, that turned and it became, well, if I'm a citizen here, I need to live like it. I need to look the part. I need to be as involved as I can. I need to walk, talk, and act like an American. That was just his mindset. If I belong to them, I need to act like them. I even saw him in training at another base one time. He had a American flag shirt, like Hawaiian shirt. And I mean, it's cool, American flags, that's all great. But it was like an optical illusion because there was like 7,000 American flags on it. Like he just never gave that up. He was like, if I'm an American, my life, I want to look like it. But here's the thing. I think too many Christians gain citizenship in heaven with a peace and mercy that's given to them from God, but they sit there and continue to say, but I love the world. But I love this world. Why would I give this up? And it's okay to say that at first. It's okay to be confused about this life when you start walking it. It's even okay to admit that sometimes our hearts do indeed want the things of the world. But what is not okay is for us to continue living like our citizenship is also in the world when we have an identification that says heaven. Me and Tyler, you see this even in practice a lot. When someone meets us and they don't know who we are, once they find out we're pastors, they like, oh, sorry. And it's ridiculous. If you knew our past, it ain't good. But we can be going out playing golf, and 5-6 holes in, someone turns around. I've had this happen. Someone turns around and they've been acting a fool up to this point, and they go, so man, what do you do for a living? I'm like, oh man, I'm one of the pastors down at church down the road. And they're like, it's good to meet you, brother. And for the rest of the round, their language, their posture just completely changes. They hit a bad shot and they're like, oh, fiddlesticks. But that happens. People change their posture. They act one way and then they get around some people and act another. Some of you, even in here, may be at times where you're laughing at videos on YouTube or Netflix, and if your parents walked in the room or your pastor or whoever walked in the room, you'd immediately turn it off. But here's the thing. When we are citizens of a kingdom with a king that's worth serving, we are not to conduct ourselves on Saturday like we're of one world and then act like we're part of a different kingdom on Sunday. My daughter, this was so cute. Before I came here, I had to run home. And I had to grab something. And as I'm walking out, my daughter goes, Daddy, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to go preach. And she said, preach what? I was like, Jesus. And she goes, oh, so you're going to the sky? I was like, not literally, but in a way, yes. We're going to try. But I just love that innocence. Like in her eyes, because when we talk to her, me and her mom, we get to say like, hey, like God is with us at all time. And then she doesn't understand what that is. So she's like, well, where is he? We're like, well, he's watching over us. And then in her innocent childlike mind, she doesn't think heaven's that far away. She doesn't think it's too far off. And there's a close connection that when Daddy goes to the church, that he's getting to interact with that heaven. But maybe we need to adopt this mindset because heaven is a lot closer than we think it is. And what we would do in front of a king that's worth serving ought to be what we do in everyday life. Your citizenship not only gives you belonging to a kingdom, but also a people in victory that God's given you. There's character and then characteristics, attributes. We are a team. Let me tell you something, let's just cut it straight. We are a team of believers. If you are a born-again Christian, we are on the same side, playing with the same jersey with one name on the back, and that is Christ. We belong to him, but we also belong to each other. Because he says, conduct yourselves in a a manner worthy of the gospel. What does he follow that up with? Serving others. He says, whether I come see you or remain absent, I will hear of you, standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving together in the faith of the gospel. Let me tell you, you're not going to be the only one in heaven. If you go to heaven, you're not going to be the only one there. You're going to be kicking it there with the church. You're going to be kicking it there, hopefully with some people that you brought along with you. But if we're to live with others for eternity, we serve them here in this life. Why wouldn't we? He says, you stand firm in this. This is not behavior modification. It is unification. Unification on the gospel because of Jesus. We come together. Not because we're all buddies, because let me tell you, you're around enough people, you're not going to be buddies with everyone. But that does not mean you're not called to serve them and love them and be unified with them just as much. There is a reason that there is no such thing as a lone wolf Christian. There's a reason that in Hebrews he commands them to not forsake the gathering. When we belong with other Christians, we live as we belong to God. When you join a church, because there's a thing of church membership. When you join a church, you are saying that I align with these people. Not because we all have this motto or whatever, but because we have a unified desire, a unified direction we're moving, a unified mission to serve the kingdom, and that I'm one with y'all because I'm one with Christ. That is what it means to be a part of a church, to live and serve God and others together. Have you ever talked to anyone in prison? If you say yeah all the time, maybe consider other friends. But if you ever talk to someone who's been to prison, you'll find that if you ask, what's the worst possible thing that can happen in prison? They'll say isolation, solitary confinement, every single time. That's the worst possible thing. But number two, right there next to it, is being in the general population where you're not in isolation, but you have no friends and no one to back you. When you're alone, you're out there, everyone's walking by, but no one sees you. They say that's the worst thing that can happen. And let me tell you, you can go to church every Sunday. You can come here every Thursday night. You can go to BCM, you can go to Crew, you can go to RUF, and everything in between, and still be isolated by your decisions to walk this life alone. You gotta find people to run this course with, to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. Pilgrim's Progress. If I was to tell you any book to read outside the Bible to show you more what it looks like to follow Christ, it would 100% be The Pilgrim's Progress. It's one of the most sold Christian books of all time, written way back when by John Bunyan. In the book is an allegory. So all the characters in it have literal names. The main character is a young man named Christian. And Christian finds he's living in the city of destruction. And he meets Mr. Evangelist. And Mr. Evangelist tells him news from the good book, and that his city will be destroyed. And that he can leave this city and go to the narrow gate on the path that leads to the celestial city, where there's a king who reigns forever. So the story of the Pilgrim's Progress is a man named Christian running to the kingdom of heaven. And it tells of all the trials he goes through. He is tricked by Mr. Worldly Wise Man. He's beaten by arrogance, almost dies on the hill of morality, is almost killed in the valley of the shadow of death, but he keeps on the path. But here's the thing. There's like 4,000 characters in this story. He has a friend called Faithful, another friend called Hopeful. Like, he interacts with all these different people. He meets foes and friends along the entire journey to heaven. And he knows who his friends and who his foes are based off the path they're running. He knows if I stay on the path towards the heaven, towards the kingdom, if I see someone go in the same direction I am, they must be a citizen of the same kingdom I am. But if I see them going this way, if I see them even maybe kind of looking like they're going the same direction, but they're on a different path, then they are not of the kingdom that I'm running to. They are not true citizens, no matter what they say. And they all try to pull them off the path. Almost all of them say, "You fool, do you not know how many people have died trying to journey to this city?" And Christian almost always responds the same way. "My king died for me. He is the one I will serve. I will stay the course because I'm a member of a city that can't be destroyed." His citizenship changed how he walked his path, but also who he walked that path with. And let me tell you, it's great to be friends with people who don't know, but you gotta be on some people with the same path, going the same direction as you are. And the final thing of the ABCs of a great life is that we have a great approach, we have a great belonging, but we also have a great certainty. A great certainty. It says in verse 28, I'll read that part again, "In no way alarmed by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction for them, but salvation for you, and that too from God. For to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, experiencing the same conflict in which you saw in me, and now here to be in me." He's saying here, salvation, this citizenship, even this approach to life is a gift of certainty, a certainty that you can hold on to because of who it came from, a God who is always consistent. He says, this is a gift for you, this salvation, and it is from God. Have you ever seen like these YouTube trends of these like 12-year-olds who have a gazillion dollars and they go find homeless people and they give them a $400,000 house, and it's like such a sweet 10-minute video, and they're like, "Oh, thank you so much," and it's very generous. But then they don't talk to you about what happens after that. And April 15th comes around and you got to pay taxes. And these people who were homeless, who didn't have any money, now have to pay property tax of a lot of money on these houses. And there's actually been stories of the people doing this and the homeless people ending right back up on the street in more debt than they were before. It's a gift that was kind of disguised as, or it was a burden that was disguised as a gift. That's not the case of our gift of salvation in life. There are no contingencies. There is no bad aftertaste. It's only blessing, not burden. And you can sit there and say, "Well, Cody, seems like there's a burden." He says right here in the next verse, like, "For to you has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer." Like, it seems like there's a burden, Cody. To suffer like him, to suffer like Paul. But don't overlook that word granted. It's been granted to you. You know what the worst person in the world in the holidays is? It is people who are not grateful. Oh, I've experienced some of them in my time. They get that gift and they open it up and they don't think about the fact that someone has thought about that for days. They've planned that out. They've made it. Maybe they purchased it. If they purchased it, then they have to go to a job and get money to be able to buy that. And then they wrapped it. And then some brat says, "This ain't what I asked for." Or, "Oh, how could you forget to buy batteries with it?" Or, "This is last year's model, and I just want to pick them up and throw them out the door." And it's just so infuriating to be around ungrateful people. It's insufferable. Because not only are they not appreciating the gift, they're not appreciating what the person who gave them the gift went through to get them that gift. This gift is one to be grateful for, this life that we live. Because you wouldn't have it if Christ didn't die on the cross to begin with. And it comes with an assurance, a certainty that is not based off you and your efforts, it's based off Christ and his love, which will never end. Because we can honestly say, for me to live as Christ, man, you can't hurt us. Ain't got nothing to lose. It's like a boxer that's told this is his last fight. He'll never get a shot at the title. Man, that last final fight of his career, man, that's the most dangerous boxer in the world. He ain't got nothing to lose. His destiny is set. He's going to be swinging for the fences. fights like how he wants to fight. So why do we let circumstances of our life make us become uncertain about a gift and a victory that Christ has already given us and won us for? There's one more thing I want to say about Pilgrim's Progress. I'm actually going to read it for you. The band, if you want to, come on up. We have a certainty from a gift that's from God, that's salvation, this life. I can't promise you what's going to happen. I can't. Some of you may have great picket fence lives. Some of you may have some real struggle. Real struggle. Hey, as a dad, I think about that all the time. I think about what my daughters are going to go through, what the life that they're going to live. And it worries me because let me tell you, I've seen what life can be like when it's good and what it's like when it's bad. I almost had my life at 19 years old taken from me when I got shot. And I was just sitting there minding my own business and was shot in the stomach. And let me tell you something. You're not promised tomorrow. And even if you are, tomorrow may not look great from your eyes. But it is still a gift. It's a blessing that comes with no burden because it's a blessing from God. Now, what is a great life? That's what we all started out with. Where do you see your life in 40, 30, 20 years from now? What do you want to see? What is your mark of a great life? What makes it all worth it in the end? Why can we have hope despite all the pain? Because when we live for Christ, dying is also gain. I'm gonna read the page from the final chapter of this book, Pilgrim's Progress. Christian and his friend, Faithful, arrive to the heavenly gates. And they're met by the angels there, and they say, "Welcome, servants of your king." And they say, what is there for us when we go in? It says this: "When you arrive there, you shall have white robes given to you, and you shall walk and talk with the king every day of your country, even though all the days of eternity. There you shall never again see such things that you saw when you were on earth, namely the sorrow, the sickness, the affliction, and the death. The former things have passed away." Then Christian said, "What will we do in this holy city?" And the angel said, "You will there receive the comforts from all your toil and have joy for all your sorrows. You will reap what you have sown, even the fruits of all your prayers and tears and suffering for the king along the way. In that place you will wear a crown of gold and have sight and vision of the Holy One, and you will see him as he is." Listen to this. "You shall serve him who you desire to serve in this world. For me to live is Christ. Though with all difficulty, because of the weakness of your flesh, your eyes will be delighted with seeing him and hearing the voice of the Mighty One." We talked about belonging. "There you shall also enjoy your friends again, who have gone there before you, and shall joyfully receive everyone that follows you in that holy place. There also you shall be clothed with others, with glory and majesty, fit to accompany the King of glory, when he shall come with trumpet sounds in the clouds, as upon the wings of the wind, you shall come with him. Yes, and when he shall pass sentences upon all the workers of iniquity, whether the angels or the men, you shall have a voice in that judgment, and you will live with your Lord forever." And this last thing, the two angels proclaimed back to the gate, "These are the men who have loved our Lord while they were in this world. and who have left all for his holy name. He has sent us to fetch them, and we have brought them this far in this journey. May they go in and look upon their Redeemer's face. This is what it means to live for Christ, and to die is gain. In this time, you respond how you need to. You may just need to get back to this altar and change your approach in how you do this. Maybe you need to get some friends after and change what it means to belong to others and to a kingdom. But you may not be able to say, even to begin, one day in your life that for you has ever been to live for Christ. And if that's the case with the ABCs, there's another ABCs, and that's the ABCs of salvation. It's A, admit to God that you are indeed a sinner. It is believe that he was God's son and that he died on the cross for you. And then confess that Christ is your Lord and repent and following him. That's not someone catchy, someone said. That's Romans 8, 9, and 10. Or I'm sorry, 10 verses 9 and 10. That's what it means. Me and Tyler can talk with you about that, because we don't want you leaving and walking a journey that's not worth following, and dying a death that's not worth dying, and living a life that's not worth living. We're not perfect at it. And there's been times I've fallen off the path many times, but I've got a God that draws me back to it so I can keep running to him. Respond in this time how you need.